If we had to point to only one explanation for how the West broke away from the model of all the world's other societies and struck out on a path of its own, in my humble opinion, it's religious tolerance. Until not so long ago, religious intolerance was the norm. Religion was a public affair. As late as the mid-1800s, every European state, and all Islamic ones, had an official state-supported religion, and often everyone had to attend services at least once a year. Other religions might grudgingly be allowed to exist within a state's borders, but just barely. In contrast, in the West today, religion is a strictly private affair. The state takes no interest in anyone's religion or lack of religion. But where did religious intolerance come from in the first place? Who invented it? When and why? And is the West's religious tolerance now in danger? Let's find out. My name is Alex, and welcome to Depth History, where we talk about how the human condition created and creates the human condition. Without religious tolerance, there would be no freedom of speech, no democracy, no equal status before the law for everyone. There would still be slavery. The social structure would still be rigidly stratified, with very few opportunities for advancement. In short, Western society would never have moved on from its medieval roots. So, what is religious toleration? Is it the weak form? We reluctantly agree to let them live next to us because unfortunately we can't kill them all. Or is it the strong form? Their religious beliefs are none of our business, and our religious beliefs are none of theirs. Religious toleration became a real issue in Europe after the Reformation because the Catholic Church had always managed to suppress all non-Catholic religions in Europe. Whenever a threatening movement arose, the Church usually managed to either have the secular authorities violently suppress the movement by killing the annoying people, as happened with the Cathars, or channel the movement into a framework the Church could control, as happened with religious orders like the Franciscans. After the Reformation and the religious wars that followed, all sides agreed to implement the weak form of toleration. We reluctantly agreed to let them live next to us because unfortunately we can't kill them all. But these agreements didn't last very long, and after some even more destructive wars in which more millions were killed, they were replaced by other agreements that did manage to mostly prevent bloodshed, but still clung to the weaker form of toleration. People of different Christian confessions were forced to live together, or at least next to each other, without the benefit of being allowed to kill each other. In rare cases, such as the German town of Biberach, Catholics and Lutherans were even forced to share not only the same town, but also the same church buildings at different times of the day. Catholics from 5 a.m. to 6 a.m., Lutherans from 6 to 8, and so on throughout the day. Where did tolerance come from? In pre-Christian times, religious beliefs were not a distinct entity, but an inseparable part of each ethnic group's culture. There was no such thing as a religion, a set of religious beliefs and practices that was distinct from an ethnic group's culture. Ancient Egyptians had their language, their marriage customs, their foods, their ways of dress, and their religious beliefs, all bundled together. Ancient Assyrians had theirs, ancient Jews had theirs, and so on in every ancient society. Every society understood their gods to be their own. No one tried to impose their gods on their neighbors, just as no one tried to impose their foods on their neighbors. Religious beliefs were not transferable between cultures. When the Romans conquered other peoples, they didn't impose their gods on them, though they did sometimes force conquered peoples to add the Roman emperor to their list of gods. They never demanded that they replace their gods with the Roman gods. For Romans, religious worship, especially sacrifices to the Roman gods, was a public obligation that was believed to ensure military success, good harvests, and public prosperity. The idea that political prosperity and, in general, the welfare of individuals and states depends on the will of the gods, thus their tribute must be duly paid, is common to all ancient societies. All citizens, atheists included, had to meet the religious demands of the city or the state, which were normally quite few. Participating in the sacrifices was required of everyone, but no one asked whether a person actually believed in the gods. Christianity overturned all of this. Christianity was the first actual religion. It was not associated with a specific ethnic group. It was a proselytizing religion with universal ambitions. It sought converts from every ethnic group, from everybody in the world. It was emancipated from kinship, tribe, and locality to become a community of the faithful. Christianity involved a radical change in the religious identity of the individual. It demanded a personal, reflexive commitment and total involvement, excluding any other form of religious activity. As monotheists who did not recognize the Roman gods, Christians and Jews refused to participate in the Roman sacrifices. Jews, an ethnic group whose religion had gained some level of tolerance because Romans respected its antiquity, were permitted to substitute for the Roman sacrifices and prayers their own sacrifices and prayers for the Roman state in their Jerusalem temple. Christianity, on the other hand, was a new religion. It rejected the Roman gods. It did not practice sacrifices, and it renounced all other forms of religious activities. So, when Christians refused to participate in Roman sacrifices, they were accused of atheism, of angering the gods, of endangering the Roman state, and were often tortured and executed, even fed to the lions in public spectacles. Saint Marcellius the centurion was a 3rd century Roman soldier who became known for his courageous witness to the Christian faith. While serving in the Roman army, he publicly declared that his true allegiance was to Jesus Christ and refused to take part in pagan rituals or acts of violence commanded by the emperor. For this bold stance of conscience, he was arrested, tried, and eventually executed around the year 298. In short, the Roman state could not tolerate Christianity and severely persecuted its believers. Beginning in 303, the Emperor Diocletian and his successors rescinded Christians' legal rights and demanded that they comply with traditional religious practices. By the way, if you're enjoying this video, please click the like icon, share the video, subscribe, and ring the bell so that you'll be notified of new videos as soon as they come out. It really helps the channel. Thanks in advance. In the first Christian centuries, Christian theologians argued for religious tolerance, appealing to emperors in the form of apologies in which they emphasized the loyalty of Christians to the Roman state. Tertullian, a 2nd century theologian, wrote that emperors should guarantee religious freedom for Christians on an equal footing with the rest of their subjects because of their loyalty to the empire and their full integration in it. The 2nd century Justin Martyr wrote to the Emperor Antoninus Pius, declaring that he is writing in favor of men of all races, unjustly hated and harassed. These pleas for religious tolerance may seem almost modern, but keep in mind that neither of these apologists were asking for tolerance for all religions, but only for Christianity, and specifically for their own particular version of Christianity. Both of them demanded tolerance for Christians, but were at the same time intolerant of others. Tertullian wrote a large amount of polemic literature against pagans, Jews, and heretics. These apologies were written at a time when Christianity was still a minority religion oppressed by the emperor. In The year 313, 10 years after Diocletian's anti-Christian decrees, the Emperor Constantine the Great legalized Christianity, and 12 years later, in 325, he convened the Council of Nicaea in order to resolve the innumerable theological disagreements among Christians. More than 200 bishops met to decide which beliefs comprised true Christianity and which did not, because by then there was already a long list of competing alternative Christianities: Donatism, Docetism, Montanism, Marcionism, Nestorianism, and many others. And by the 4th century, one of these, Arianism, had become so widespread that the Council of Nicaea was forced to deal with it. The council condemned Arianism, declaring it to be a heresy, hoping to settle forever the contentious issue of the precise nature of the divine persons. But a few decades later, 2 bishops, St. Augustine of Hippo and St. Epiphanius of Salamis, were each able to compile a list of over 80 Christian heresies, and their lists were not identical. In 380, Emperor Theodosius declared Nicene Christianity, the version the Council of Nicaea had decided was the only true Christianity, to be the official state religion of the Roman Empire. Christianity had triumphed, and with that, all other religious beliefs, Judaism, paganism, but especially the many alternative Christianities, were suppressed. There were no more pleas from Christian theologians for religious tolerance. Those days were over. Only Nicene Christianity received political and financial support from the empire. Other versions were all heresies, to be uprooted, and not always by peaceful means. A theological dispute between rival bishops in an Anatolian city was described as follows. Houses were burned down and all manner of fighting broke out. Priests were dragged naked to the forum by the bishop himself, who profaned the sacred host of the Lord by hanging it openly and in public from the necks of priests, and with horrendous barbarity tore the vestments from holy virgins dedicated to God and Christ and displayed them naked before the public in the forum in the middle of the city. Do you think this dispute was about a subtle theological issue? Or maybe it was about who gets the emperor's money? Before Constantine, when Christians were a persecuted minority, they appealed to the Roman tradition of freedom of worship and held religious toleration to be a sacred duty. But once Christianity became the Roman Empire's official religion, and the empire began funding the church, and the emperor himself adjudicated its doctrinal disputes, Christian theologians changed their tune. In the coming centuries, the West became a persecuting society in which minority groups like Jews, lepers, and heretics were systematically targeted and persecuted by both the religious and secular powers, enabled by a growing centralization of power and the creation of institutions designed to suppress the perceived enemies of state and church. And so, religious toleration in the West came to an end. Experience had taught him, Emperor Julian, that no wild beasts are so dangerous to man as Christians are to one another, his chronicler wrote, who went on to suggest that Julian believed that the Christians left to themselves would simply tear each other apart. Here are some examples of medieval and early modern Christian religious intolerance. Charlemagne, the first Holy Roman Emperor, whom Pope Leo III personally crowned in Rome on Christmas Day 1800, beheaded thousands of pagan Saxon nobles who refused to convert to Christianity. In 1209, Pope Innocent II declared the Albigensian Crusade against the Cathars, a religious sect in southern France. The crusade lasted 20 years, and it's estimated that as many as 1 million heretics of all ages were killed. In 1415, the Council of Constance, which had been convened to solve the problem of there being 3 popes at the same time, declared the Englishman John Wycliffe, who'd been dead for 30 years, a heretic, and ordered that his writings be burned, that his corpse exhumed and burned, and the ashes thrown into the river. Wycliffe's crimes were translating the Bible into English and calling for the church hierarchy to be replaced with poor priests who lived in poverty. In addition, the council burned the Czech theologian Jan Hus at the stake. Though he had been promised safe conduct, the emperor decided that there was no need to honor promises to heretics. In 1553, the zealous French Protestant theologian Jean Calvin had the Spanish physician Michael Servetus burned at the stake in Geneva for denying the Trinity. This event was especially notable because in response, for the first time in Europe, voices were raised in protest, notably by the French preacher Sébastien Castellio, one of the first Christian proponents of religious toleration and freedom of conscience, but nothing came of these protests. The French wars of religion between Catholics and Calvinists, actually a series of 8 wars between 1562 and 1598, in which between 2 to 4 million people died, tens of thousands of them in the wake of the St. Bartholomew's Day massacre of 1572, orchestrated by King Charles IX and his devout mother, the Pope's cousin, Catherine de' Medici. The brutal 80-year-long Dutch War of Independence in the years 1568 to 1648 between Catholic Habsburgs and the Protestant Netherlands, in which between 4 to 8 million people died. The 30 Years' War, a religious war that involved most of the European powers between 1618 and 1648, and in which between 4 to 10 million people died. So, taking all of these events into account, I think we can safely say that religious toleration was not highly valued in pre-modern Europe. The religious wars of the 16th and 17th centuries, with their massive destruction and millions of dead, convinced many Europeans that these wars would never achieve anything, that no one was going to win, and that there had to be a better way going forward. These centuries were also times of great changes, discoveries, the age of exploration, and inventions, especially the printing press, that put into people's heads the ideas that the world was not exactly what the churches had been saying it was, that life didn't have to go on the way it always had, that there could be a better way without the hate, without the endless wars that achieved nothing but death and destruction. 2 Protestant European philosophers, the French Calvinist Pierre Bayle and the English Anglican John Locke, were the most forceful voices for religious toleration in the 17th century. Pierre Bayle was born in 1647 and studied at a Jesuit college, converted to Catholicism, then back to Calvinism, which made it dangerous for him to remain in France. In 1681, just before the megalomaniacal King Louis XIV, who was determined to achieve his dream of one nation, one king, one religion, repealed the Edict of Nantes that had granted religious freedoms to French Protestants. Bayle escaped to the Netherlands along with many other French Protestants. He eventually got a position teaching at a Calvinist college in Rotterdam. In his philosophical commentary on the words of the Gospel, Luke 14:23, anonymously published in 4 volumes between 1686 and 1688, Bayle wrote, "Any particular dogma, whatever it may be, whether it is advanced on the authority of Scripture or whatever else may be its origin, is to be regarded as false if it clashes with the clear and definite conclusions of the natural understanding, and that more particularly in the domain of ethics." Bayle argued that possession of the truth does not justify persecution of those who deny the truth, and the parable in Luke 14:23, in which the householder tells his servant to compel them to come in, cannot be understood to justify religious compulsion. St. Augustine had interpreted the parable to justify calling upon the Roman emperor to serve true religion by suppressing heresy and schism and forcibly converting heretics. But Bayle rejected this interpretation, saying that Christ cannot have intended anything contrary to what the natural light of reason reveals to us, and that forced conversions cannot be right because they produced insincere converts. He developed these ideas across hundreds of pages in 91 meticulously argued chapters. Bayle claimed that toleration is the thing in the world best fitted for retrieving the Golden Age, and if one religion believed that its possession of the truth allowed it to persecute the others, as each party believes itself to the Orthodox, it's plain that if Jesus Christ had commanded persecution, that each sect would think itself obliged to obey him by persecuting all the rest with the utmost vigor, till they constrained them to embrace their own profession of faith. Thus, we would see a continual war between people of the same country, either in the streets or in the open field, or between nations of different opinions, so that Christianity would be a mere hell upon earth to all who loved peace, or who happened to be the weaker side. Bayle's target was King Louis XIV, who was waging a merciless campaign to convince Protestants to convert to Catholicism by, among other tactics, quartering young soldiers in their homes with explicit instructions to beat the husbands and harass the wives and daughters, a campaign that had the full support and approval of the highest levels of the French clergy. Earlier, in 1682, Bayle had published, also anonymously, various thoughts on the occasion of a comet, in which he argued that a society of atheists could be a moral society. This at a time when Christian theologians unanimously believed that atheists could not possibly be moral because they had no fear of punishment in an afterlife. When his authorship of these works became known, Bayle was condemned by both Protestant and Catholic clergy, and in 1693 dismissed from his teaching post. From then until his death in 1705, he published several editions of his monumental Historical and Critical Dictionary, a skeptical and critical analysis of historical and philosophical figures featuring a vast collection of entries with extensive footnotes and cross-references that challenged established ideas and became a cornerstone of the Enlightenment. Bayle was greatly influential during his lifetime, and his championing of toleration helped inspire the French philosophers of the Enlightenment. But by the mid-18th century, his influence had faded, and today he remains almost forgotten. John Locke was an English philosopher and physician born in 1632, whose writings established the foundations of empiricism and classical liberalism. He fled England during the turmoil preceding the Glorious Revolution of 1688 and returned only with the accession of William and Mary. In his letter concerning toleration, published anonymously in 1689, but written in 1685, Locke wrote, "Since you are pleased to inquire what are my thoughts about the religion, I must needs answer you freely, that I esteem that toleration to be the chief characteristical mark of the true church." By characteristical mark of the true church, Locke meant that the Church of England's toleration was proof that it was the true church. The toleration of those that differ from others in matters of religion is so agreeable to the gospel of Jesus Christ and to the genuine reason of mankind that it seems monstrous for men to be so blind as not to perceive the necessity and advantage of it in so clear a light. As for the civil ruler persecuting Christians, this is not within his legitimate power. First, because the care of souls is not committed to the civil magistrate any more than to other men. It is not committed unto him, I say, by God, because it appears not that God has ever given any such authority to one man over another, so as to compel anyone to his religion. Locke argued that government should stay clear of religious issues because a government cannot decide which is the true religion, and enforcing a single true religion is pointless because people cannot be forced to believe through violence, and forcing religious uniformity would cause far more social disorder than allowing diversity. If any rights are permitted to any one religion, those rights must be permitted to other religions. Nay, if we may openly speak to the truth, and as becomes one man to another, neither pagan nor Mohammedan nor Jew ought to be excluded from the civil rights of the Commonwealth because of his religion. The gospel commands no such thing. But not Roman Catholics. Locke's tolerance did not extend that far. Like many of his countrymen, he felt that Catholics could not reconcile their loyalty to the Pope with loyalty to their country. As was Bale, Locke too was attacked by theologians and even accused of supporting a Jesuit plot to destroy the English Church. Locke was an enormously influential political philosopher whose ideas like unalienable rights and the separation of church and state inspired the language and concepts of the American Declaration of Independence and its Constitution. In the ancient pagan world, religious toleration was not an issue because it was understood that religious beliefs were an inseparable part of each ethnic group's culture. The advent of Christianity, a proselytizing religion with universal ambitions, introduced the possibility of religious conversion, and with it, the concept of toleration. When Christians were a persecuted minority, their leaders advocated for toleration. But when they became a majority and seized political control, they became obsessively and often violently intolerant of other religions, a persecuting society. Religious toleration eventually became the norm in the West only after innumerable religious wars and millions of deaths. In today's West, another proselytizing religion with universal ambitions has appeared, vastly increasing its numbers and influence in recent decades. And if history is any guide, if that religion ever becomes a majority, religious toleration will once again disappear. If you enjoyed this video, please click the like icon, share the video, subscribe, and ring the bell, so that you'll be notified of new videos as soon as they come out. It really helps the channel. If you'd like to support the channel, why not buy me a coffee at the link below? Thanks for watching, and see you next time.